Welcome to Ease Podcast, where minds ignite, exploring learning day and night. Educators thrive, young minds grow, in science, tech, and art skills flow. Natural minds make us survive. Ease of funny minds, so future strive. Welcome to Ease Podcast.
This podcast is produced by EASE, the European network of STEAM educators, uniting STEAM educators from Europe and all over the world. This product may contain traces of artificial intelligence inside. Join us and find a handful of educational resources at easeeducators.com.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive, this time into the EU's Union of Skills initiative. We've got kind of mix of stuff to look at, communications, fact sheets, even a strategic plan document. Should give us a good overview of what this is all about.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's important to go beyond just, what it is and think about why it matters, what it could mean for our listeners, in the long run, maybe even uncover some of those hidden opportunities or challenges.
Right, some of those things that aren't obvious at first glance. Okay, so to kick things off, I think it's worth starting with a little reality check here. Europe's working age population is shrinking by like 1 million adults every year.
Wow, that's a huge loss of potential workers.
It is, and that loss contributes to a pretty significant skills crisis across Europe. And we're talking about an impact on everything from, our ability to innovate to tackling big issues like climate change.
Yeah, it's really across the board. And I think one of the things that struck me looking at these materials is just how many sectors are being affected by this shortage of skilled workers. Right. Construction, transport, healthcare.
Even welders and plumbers.
Exactly, even those essential trades.
And, it makes you think, what does that mean for businesses that are desperately trying to find qualified people? And how does it affect us as consumers when those services become harder to find and more expensive?
It's like a ripple effect that touches all of us.
Definitely. Now, one thing that jumps out from these materials is the emphasis on STEM skills. Science, technology, engineering, and math. They seem to be both a big part of the problem and a key part of the solution.
Absolutely. Those STEM skills are really the foundation for so many industries these days. But one of the things we see is that EU students are falling behind, particularly in math and science, compared to their counterparts in other parts of the world, particularly Asia. And when you look at the PISA scores...
Yeah, those international student assessments.
Exactly. It really highlights that gap.
And it's not just the students, right? There's also a massive teacher shortage, especially in those STEM fields, which obviously has a direct impact on the quality of education those kids are getting.
Yeah, it's a real challenge. And I think, fewer qualified teachers lead to fewer students excelling in STEM, which then translates to a workforce that isn't really equipped to meet the demands of these growing sectors, things like green technology, digitalization, even defense.
It's a chain reaction.
It is, and it's hitting those vital industries hard.
Now, this isn't just a tech issue, right? Looking at these materials, it seems like this skills gap is impacting a much wider range of fields.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the creative industries, the cultural industries. They're having to grapple with AI and all these emerging technologies, and even healthcare, which is so fundamental to all of us, is facing this massive shortage of medical professionals, like 1.2 million across the EU.
1.2 million. Wow. That's a scary thought when you think about how that impacts the quality and cost of care for everyone. It's clear that Europe needs to do something to address this, and that's where this Union of Skills initiative comes in.
Exactly. It's a really ambitious initiative that aims to tackle this skills crisis from multiple angles, kind of like a multi-pronged approach with 4 key areas of focus.
Okay, so from what I'm seeing, the first area is all about building that strong educational foundation, starting from early childhood all the way through adulthood. And there are a couple of specific initiatives mentioned, like the Action Plan on Basic Skills and the STEM Education Strategic Plan.
Right. And then the second focus is on making upskilling and reskilling the norm, something that's integrated into our lives and not just something we think about when we're forced to. And there are a bunch of interesting initiatives under this umbrella, like the Pact for Skills, EU Skills Academies, these skills guarantee pilot programs, and even micro-credentials, which are these shorter, more focused learning opportunities for adults.
Micro-credentials. I was wondering about those. So is the idea that you could take like a shorter course to learn a very specific skill that you need for your job? rather than going back to school for a whole degree.
That's exactly it. It's about making skills development more accessible and adaptable to the needs of the modern workforce.
That makes a lot of sense. And what about the third focus area?
That one is about making it easier for skilled workers to move freely within the EU. So looking at things like the Skills Portability Initiative and even exploring this idea of a European degree that would be recognized across all member states.
So someone with a medical degree from, say, Italy could easily practice in Germany without having to jump through all those hoops to get their credentials recognized.
Precisely. It's about breaking down those barriers and creating a more fluid and dynamic labor market.
Okay, and then the fourth and final focus area seems to be all about attracting global talent to the EU.
Right. They're talking about an EU talent pool, a new visa strategy, and things like MSCA Choose Europe, all aimed at enticing skilled workers from around the world to bring their talents to Europe.
It's impressive how comprehensive this initiative seems to be. It's not just about throwing money at the problem, it's about tackling it from all these different angles. But I'm curious, are there any specific examples of how these initiatives are actually going to work in practice?
There are, and I think that's a great place to pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
You know how the EU is actually planning to make this union of skills a reality?
Yeah.
I think you said there were some pretty interesting initiatives in the works.
Yeah, there are quite a few, actually, but let's maybe start with something we touched on earlier, STEM education. One of the more concrete proposals is this idea of setting up STEM education centers.
Oh yeah, those sounded pretty cool. Can you maybe give us a little more detail on what those would actually look like in practice?
Sure. So imagine these hands-on interactive learning spaces, popping up in schools all across the EU. They're really designed to be engaging and exciting, partnering with businesses, even science museums, to give students these real-world insights and experiences.
So it's not just, textbooks and lectures. It's about actually getting kids excited about science and technology through hands-on learning.
Exactly. It's about sparking that curiosity and passion early on. And these centers could even partner with, local businesses, research institutions to give students a taste of what it's actually like to work in these fields.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
It's one thing to learn about science in the classroom, but it's a whole other thing to see how it's applied in the real world.
Right, and speaking of real-world application, the Girls Go STEM initiative is another really cool example. They're aiming to train 1 million girls in STEM fields by 2028.
Yeah, I remember us talking about that earlier. It's an ambitious goal, but it seems so important to address that gender gap in STEM.
It is, and it's not just about equal representation. It's about recognizing that there's this huge pool of talent that we're overlooking. Studies have shown that diverse teams are more innovative and productive. So by encouraging more girls to pursue STEM careers, we're opening up a whole world of possibilities.
That's a great point. Now, what about people who are already in the workforce and, maybe need to upskill or reskill? I saw something in these materials about STEM skills foundries. What are those all about?
Wow, those are fascinating. Basically, they're designed to connect student entrepreneurs with companies and resources, things like venture capital. It's about taking those innovative ideas and turning them into real businesses.
So it's not just about the technical skills, it's about fostering that entrepreneurial spirit and giving young people the tools they need to create their own opportunities.
Exactly. It's about nurturing that next generation of innovators and problem solvers.
That's pretty cool. It seems like a lot of these initiatives are really focused on, those practical skills and real-world application. But what about those of us who maybe aren't, starting a business or going into a hardcore STEM field? Are there opportunities for upskilling in other areas?
Absolutely. And, those micro-credentials you were talking about earlier, those are a perfect example of how the EU is trying to make upskilling and reskilling more accessible for everyone.
Right, those bite-sized learning opportunities. Can you just remind me how those work and why they're so valuable?
Sure. So think of them as like these focused courses. They target very specific skills or knowledge areas. So let's say you're a graphic designer and you need to learn how to use a new software program, or you're a nurse and you want to specialize in a certain area of healthcare. Micro-credentials offer that targeted training without having to commit to like a full degree program.
So it's about flexibility and efficiency.
Yeah.
You quickly gain those specific skills you need to, advance in your career or maybe pivot to a new one.
Exactly. And because they're often offered online, they're accessible to people regardless of location or schedule. And you can even stack them, combine multiple micro-credentials over time to build up a more comprehensive skill set.
That's really smart. It makes lifelong learning a lot more manageable and appealing for people who are already juggling work and family responsibilities. And it seems like the EU is really serious about making lifelong learning a core part of European culture. There's even this Skills Guarantee pilot program, right?
Yeah, that's a key part of the initiative. It's specifically designed to make sure that workers in sectors that are undergoing major transitions, like those affected by automation or digitalization, have the opportunity to develop the skills they need to stay employed.
So it's kind of like a safety net for workers, making sure they're not left behind as the economy evolves.
Yeah.
Seems like a really crucial part of this whole thing. But, we've been talking a lot about the supply side, equipping people with the right skills. What about the demand side? How is the EU planning to make sure that those skills are actually recognized and valued by employers?
That's a great question, and it leads us nicely into those third and fourth focus areas of the Union of Skills, skills portability and attracting global talent. It's all about creating this more dynamic and interconnected labor market within the EU.
I'm really intrigued by this skills portability initiative. Can you talk a little bit more about how that would actually work in practice?
Sure, so it's basically about removing those barriers that often prevent people from working in different EU countries. So let's say you're a doctor who trained in Spain, but you want to work in the Netherlands. This initiative would aim to streamline that process of recognizing your qualifications across borders.
So no more bureaucratic headaches or having to redo your training just because you're moving to a different country.
Exactly. It's about making that process as smooth and efficient as possible, both for the individuals and for the employers who are looking to recruit talent from across the EU.
That makes a lot of sense. And what about this idea of a European degree? Is that something that's actually being seriously considered?
It's definitely on the table. The idea is that you would have this degree that would automatically be recognized in all the member states. So you wouldn't need to go through those country by country evaluations and validations. It would just further streamline the whole process.
That would be huge. It would make it so much easier for students to study abroad, for professionals to move around. Seems like a win-win for everyone.
Right. And then, of course, there's the focus on attracting that global talent. The EU is facing this shrinking workforce. And one way to address that is to bring in skilled workers from other countries.
Right, and they're talking about this new visa strategy to make it easier for skilled workers to come to Europe. What would that involve?
Well, the details are still being worked out, but it's likely to include things like streamlining those visa application processes, maybe even creating new visa categories for specific skills or sectors, and making it easier for family members to come along.
So basically making the EU a more attractive and welcoming destination for talented individuals from around the world. And then there's this EU talent pool. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, that's going to be an online platform that basically connects businesses with skilled workers from outside the EU who are interested in working in Europe. It's about making the recruitment process more efficient and transparent.
So it's like a matchmaking service for businesses and skilled workers.
Exactly. It's about cutting through that red tape and helping businesses find the talent they need.
This all sounds incredibly ambitious, but I also imagine there could be some challenges in actually putting these initiatives into practice. It's one thing to have these grand plans, but another thing entirely to actually implement them, right?
You're absolutely right, and that's actually a perfect segue into the final part of our deep dive.
So we've covered a lot of ground in our deep dive into the EU's Union of Skills. We've looked at the goals, the strategies, some specific examples. But as with any big, ambitious undertaking, I imagine there are also potential challenges and maybe even some hidden opportunities that we haven't fully explored yet.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's one thing to design these, initiatives on paper,
Right.
but putting them into practice across 27 different member states
Right.
with their own unique, systems and cultures, that's a whole other challenge.
Right. It's like trying to herd cats a little bit. So let's maybe put on our critical thinking caps here for a minute. What are some of the potential hurdles that the EU might face as it tries to roll out this plan?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones is just the sheer complexity of coordination. We're talking about, aligning policies and practices across different levels of government, from the EU institutions down to national governments, regional authorities, even local entities. And, each member state has its own education and training system, and there can be significant variations even within countries.
Yeah, it's like trying to orchestrate this massive symphony with all these different instruments playing different tunes.
Exactly. And then you've got to get buy-in from all the different stakeholders, businesses, educational institutions, trade unions, individuals. The success of this really hinges on collaboration and having that shared vision.
And of course, there's the issue of funding. While the EU is dedicating a lot of resources to this initiative, I wonder if it will be enough to really make a difference, especially in countries that might already be struggling financially.
That's a valid concern. And even with enough funding, there's always the risk of inefficiency,
Yeah.
bureaucracy. We've all seen how these complex projects can sometimes get bogged down in red tape. So the EU will need to be very careful to make sure those funds are being used effectively and that the initiatives are actually delivering results.
And then there's the human element, right? We've talked about this need for a cultural shift towards embracing lifelong learning. But changing attitudes and behaviors is never easy.
It's not. And I think, the EU can't just force people to embrace lifelong learning. They need to make it appealing, accessible, relevant to people's lives. Create incentives, provide support, and showcase those benefits.
Show people what's in it for them.
Exactly.
So we've talked about some of the challenges, but I'm also curious about the flip side. What are some of the hidden opportunities that this union of skills might unlock?
Well, I think one of the most exciting possibilities is the potential for a real surge in innovation and entrepreneurship. If we invest in STEM education, promote digital skills, foster that culture of lifelong learning, the EU could become this breeding ground for new ideas and businesses.
Yeah, imagine this wave of European startups, developing cutting-edge technologies, creating jobs.
Exactly. It could be transformative for the European economy.
And another opportunity I see is in addressing social inequalities. If we make education and training more accessible and inclusive, we can level the playing field and create opportunities for everyone, regardless of their background or where they come from.
Right. It's not just about boosting the economy. It's about creating a fairer, more equitable society,
where everyone has that chance to reach their full potential.
And I think it's also important to remember the potential for individual empowerment. In this world where things are changing so rapidly, having the right skills is more important than ever. So this initiative could really give people the tools they need to navigate the future with confidence.
So it sounds like this union of skills has the potential to be really transformative.
Yeah.
Both for the EU as a whole and for individuals within it. But as we've discussed, it's not without its challenges. Ultimately, the success of this initiative is going to depend on, the commitment, the collaboration, the adaptability of everyone involved.
It's a collective effort, for sure.
So this has been a fascinating deep dive. I really appreciate you joining me for this exploration. I hope our listeners have gained some valuable insights into this complex and ambitious initiative. And until next time, keep learning and keep exploring.
Welcome to Ease Podcast, where minds ignite. Exploring learning day and night. Educators thrive, young minds grow. In science, tech, and art skills flow. Natural right to make us survive. Ease of burning minds, the future strive. Welcome to Ease Podcast.
This podcast is produced by EASE, the European network of STEAM educators, uniting STEAM educators from Europe and all over the world. This product may contain traces of artificial intelligence inside. Join us and find a handful of educational resources at easeeducators.com.